12,000 years ago, before history had a voice or a name, the Earth was home to beings unlike any alive today. Across frozen valleys and endless plains, humans of immense strength and stature moved beneath a sky ruled by ice. They hunted mammoths, carved tools from stone, and built fires that flickered against the walls of caves now buried by time. For centuries, their bones would lie hidden beneath the soil, mistaken for myths, dismissed as imagination. Yet their blood never truly vanished. It flows quietly within us, a silent memory of the giants who came before. Tonight, we return to their world, to the age when fire was survival and strength was language. Before we begin, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because stories like this, stories time tried to erase, deserve to live again. And tell me, where are you listening from right now? Let's see how far their memory still reaches, as we step into the main story. Long before the first stones of civilization were laid, before a single word was ever written or remembered, the earth was vast, untamed, and breathing beneath a sky of ice. The wind that moved across that ancient world carried no sound of machines, no echo of walls, only the rhythm of life in its most primal form. The air was thick with frost, the sun hung low and pale, and across the frozen valleys moved figures that seemed carved from the land itself, giants, not in myth, but in flesh. They were human, but not like us. Their steps sank deep into the snow, their shadows long and heavy beneath the rising auroras. Every movement carried purpose, carved by survival and shaped by the cold. Their shoulders were broad, their chests thick with muscle, their hands large enough to shatter bone. To them, the earth was both enemy and mother, an endless field of hunger, fire, and patience. In those days, humanity was not one thing. There were many kinds of us, scattered like sparks across continents. Some lived in the caves of the Pyrenees, others beneath the glacial ridges of Siberia. There were the Neanderthals of Europe, heavy-boned and powerful, the Denisovans hidden in the mountains of Asia, and smaller bands of early Homo sapiens drifting north like whispers of what was to come. But among them all were the Great Ones, beings who could lift the weight of stone, who could drag a mammoth hide alone, who stared into the blizzards without fear. Their world was not a paradise, but it was honest. Every day demanded strength. Every night demanded fire. They lived in rhythm with the land, the crunch of frost beneath their feet, the crack of bone under a flint blade, the quiet murmur of their breath in the cold air. They understood the world through instinct, not invention. They didn't conquer nature. They endured it. And yet, even in that harshness, there was beauty. In the glow of firelight, they painted their stories on cave walls. Hands pressed in ochre. Animals in motion, constellations drawn from memory. Their art was not decoration, it was remembrance, proof that they were here, that they mattered. Thousands of years later, their bones would be found buried in the dark, massive skulls, thick femurs, and jawlines that seemed impossible. Scholars would argue. Some would call them beasts. Others, fallen angels. But the truth is quieter. They were people. Giants of the Stone Age, whose breath once fogged the same cold air that fills our lungs. And though time has erased their names, the earth still remembers their footsteps, echoing faintly beneath the snow. The last dawn of the Titans began not with fire or thunder, but with silence. It was the end of the Pleistocene, when the world stood on the edge of transformation. The air was heavy with the breath of melting glaciers, and the land stretched vast and pale beneath a sky still ruled by ice. Mountains gleamed like blades, rivers roared through valleys carved by 1,000 winters. And across those endless plains moved the last of the giants, the towering children of an age the earth was preparing to forget. They woke before the light, wrapped in furs stitched from the hides of mammoths and bison. Their camps huddled close to the fire's glow, their faces shadowed by smoke and frost. Each dawn was a battle, each hunt a prayer. They were the masters of a dying world, their bodies built for cold, their hearts bound to the rhythm of the seasons. The women carried strength in their arms, The men bore scars like maps of survival. Children learned early how to track, how to carve, how to listen for the low rumble of herds moving in the distance. To live in those final centuries of the Ice Age was to live between giants. Mammoths towered like moving hills, woolly rhinoceroses snorted clouds into the frozen air, and saber-toothed cats watched from the shadowed ridges. Yet, even among such beasts, it was the humans who stood apart. Their strength was not in their weapons, but in their endurance. Their muscles bore the story of labor written in every sinew, their bones dense from a lifetime of cold and hunger. In the evenings, when the fires burned low, they gazed up at the vault of stars. The sky was sharp and endless, filled with lights so bright they cast faint shadows on the snow. Somewhere in those constellations, they saw the shapes of the creatures they hunted, the ancestors they revered, the giants they would one day become in memory. But the ice was retreating. Slowly, imperceptibly, the world that had shaped them began to vanish. The plains softened, rivers swelled, and forests crept northward. With every passing season, their world shrank. The great herds moved away, the cold loosened its grip, and the giants found themselves out of place in a warming world. They didn't know it then, but they were witnessing the last chapter of their kind. The era of titans was drawing to a close. Soon, the earth would favor the smaller, the quicker, the more adaptable. And as the first rays of a gentler sun spilled across the ice, the giants of the Stone Age, those magnificent beings of bone, frost, and fire, stood upon the plains for one final dawn, watching their world dissolve into history. Through the drifting fog of an ancient morning, the faces of another kind of humanity emerged. They were not monsters, not beasts, but people different from us, yet bound by the same fragile thread of life. Their shadows moved through the mist like echoes of ourselves, broad-shouldered, powerful, and quiet. These were the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, the great cousins of our species, born of ice and survival. Their world was carved by endurance. The Neanderthals of Europe lived in valleys where winter lasted half the year. The cold shaped their bodies like sculptors shaping stone. They were shorter than us, but heavier, stronger, built for the weight of the world they carried. Broad chests drew in air thick with frost. Massive limbs swung stone tools that could shatter bone in a single strike. Their skulls were crowned with thick brows and deep eyes, eyes that had seen 1,000 hunts and countless deaths. When they looked out across the frozen plains, they did not see wilderness, they saw home. Far to the east, in the mountains of Siberia, another people thrived, the Denisovans. They left behind almost nothing but fragments, a finger bone, a molar, and a trace of their blood that still runs quietly through ours. What we know of them is written in DNA, a message carried forward in time by the generations they never lived to meet. Their strength was legendary, their reach vast. From the Himalayas to the islands of Southeast Asia, their presence rippled across the ancient world like a whisper in the dark. For too long, we told their story as if they were failures, brutes who vanished so that we could rise. But when we look closer, the truth is humbler. They were not our enemies. They were our reflection. They buried their dead. They painted the walls of caves with ochre. They crafted jewelry from eagle talons and shells that caught the firelight like stars. In their shelters, mothers sang to children. Hunters returned to laughter. They were human in every way that mattered. And yet, as the millennia turned, the fog that once hid them began to thicken. Their world changed faster than their bodies could adapt. The ice melted, forests rose, and new people slimmer, swifter, clever with words, and fire began to move through their lands. But for a brief moment, in that space between ice and dawn, they stood beside us. Two branches of the same tree, breathing the same cold air, staring at the same stars. If you could walk among them now, you might not know where your world ends and theirs begins. The fog would hide the difference, and in their eyes, you would see something hauntingly familiar, the reflection of what we once were, and perhaps, what we still are. Their strength was not a legend. It was written in bone, forged by the ice, and tempered by the cruelty of the world that shaped them. When we uncover the skeletons of Neanderthals and Denisovans, we are not merely looking at the past, we are staring into the anatomy of survival itself. Every inch of their bodies tells the story of a people designed by necessity, engineered by nature to endure where few others could. Their skulls were monuments of endurance, thick and heavy, built to withstand both the cold and the hunt. Massive brow ridges framed deep-set eyes that faced the glare of glacial suns and endless winters. The bones of their faces were broad, their noses wide, built not by accident but by adaptation. Those wide nasal passages warmed freezing air before it reached their lungs, a biological furnace against the brutal frost. Their jaws were deep and powerful, able to crush sinew and crack marrow from bone, a vital skill in a world where every scrap of nutrition mattered. Their bodies followed the same law of resilience. Stocky, dense, and muscular, they stood shorter than most modern humans, yet their strength was astonishing. Their limbs were thick and compact, conserving heat, every muscle serving a purpose. The cross-sections of their bones tell us they endured constant strain, their daily lives a relentless test of endurance. Even their hands were weapons. Short, broad fingers gripped stone and spear with the confidence of creatures who lived by the weight of their own power. The marks left on their skeletons, grooves from tendons, scars of old injuries healed over, are the silent records of lives lived in motion, in struggle, in work that never ceased. They were heavier than us, not just in bone but in muscle. Some scientists estimate that a single swing from a Neanderthal's arm carried twice the force of a modern man's strike. Their chests expanded like barrels, their lungs drawing in great breaths of frigid air to feed bodies that burned through calories faster than any hunter alive today. Their hearts, too, must have been enormous, driving blood through a system made for mountains, caves, and snow. We like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, but when we look at them, we see something different, a reminder that strength once meant something else. They did not need civilization to survive. They were civilization in its rawest form, a partnership between body and earth, between muscle and instinct. If you had stood beside one of them, you might have felt small, fragile even. Their gaze would have been heavy and calm, their presence steady, their breath visible in the cold air. They were not gods. They were not beasts. They were the strength of ice and bone made flesh, the living proof that humanity once took a different shape, and that nature itself can sculpt perfection from hardship. Night had fallen over the Ice Age plains, but life did not sleep. Inside low stone shelters built against the wind, fire burned with a steady, hungry glow. Sparks drifted upward through the cracks of rock and fur, carrying warmth into the endless cold. The air smelled of smoke, marrow, and life, preserved by struggle. Around those flames sat the giants of that frozen world, the last of the ancient hunters. Their faces flickered in the orange light, their shadows cast long against the walls, moving like echoes of another time. Outside, the world was a cathedral of silence. Snow glittered beneath a moon so large it seemed to breathe. The frozen rivers gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the slow movement of mammoth herds crossing the valley floor. The hunters watched them from afar, massive shapes against a silver horizon, their tusks curving toward the sky like white crescents. These people, stronger than any who came after, moved with patience. They waited for the wind to shift, for the herds to come near. Their spears were carved from ash and bone, their courage carved from hunger. When the hunt began, the night trembled. The air filled with roars, with the crash of ice and the scream of dying giants. Men and women together drove the beasts toward pits lined with sharpened stakes. Their shouts rose above the blizzard, voices of command and survival. When the work was done, the valley fell silent again. The hunters stood over the fallen mammoth, steam rising from its wounds. They had earned another week of life. Back in the shelter, they feasted and sang. Meat roasted over fire while bone tools were sharpened and hides were stretched. Children laughed in the warmth, the sound muffled by the howling wind beyond the walls. One woman painted on stone, her fingers blackened with soot and ochre, tracing the shape of the very creatures they had slain. For her, the act was sacred. To paint was to remember, to keep the spirit of the animal alive within the tribe. Their world was brutal, but it was also beautiful. They knew no kings, no borders, no words for greed or conquest. Their language was the rhythm of fire and breath, of survival shared between all. As the flames burned low, the hunters lay close together, their bodies glowing with heat against the cold earth. Outside, the auroras shimmered across the sky like spirits dancing. The giants of the Stone Age closed their eyes beneath that glowing curtain, unaware that their kind would one day vanish, leaving only footprints, firelight, and the memory of strength. Deep in the mountains of southern Siberia, where the wind whispers through pine and snow, lies a cave carved into limestone, the Denisova Cave. It is a place where time sleeps lightly, where the breath of the ancient world still lingers in the cold air. For tens of thousands of years, no light entered its mouth, only silence and the patient work of dust. But within that darkness, something extraordinary waited, hidden in the soil, a fragment of a finger, a single tooth, and the story of an entire lost people. When scientists first uncovered the tiny bone in 2008, they assumed it belonged to a Neanderthal child. It was small, delicate, unremarkable to the naked eye. Yet inside that bone was a secret written in code, one that would change the history of human ancestry. When its DNA was sequenced, the results defied expectation. It did not match Neanderthals. It did not match modern humans. It belonged to something else, something older, stronger, and entirely unknown. The world had just met the Denisovans. These mysterious humans were the giants of the Altai, their bodies broad and tall, their bones dense and powerful. They thrived in altitudes where ordinary lungs would collapse, their blood rich with adaptations we still carry today. From the Tibetan Plateau to the jungles of Southeast Asia, traces of their DNA remain in the people who live there. Every breath taken above the clouds, every heartbeat that endures thin air, is a gift from them. They were wanderers of ice and stone, their lives unfolding in the shadow of glaciers and roaring rivers. Inside the cave, archaeologists found ornaments made of polished bone and green chlorite, pendants carved with precision that spoke of minds as sharp as ours. They shaped tools with artistry, hunted game across frozen valleys, and may have met with both Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens in fleeting, fateful encounters. Their children would carry the mixed blood of three worlds, the ancient, the enduring, and the future. And yet, like the fog that drifts through the Altai Mountains, the Denisovans vanished. No one knows when their fires burned out. Perhaps the changing climate erased their hunting grounds, or perhaps their descendants simply melted into us, their legacy living quietly in our veins. When the wind moves through the mouth of the Denisova Cave today, it carries that memory. It hums through the darkness where their tools still lie buried. The lost children of Altai are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their bones may rest in the earth, but their strength, their breath, their blood still walk among us. Beneath the surface of our skin lies a story older than memory. It is not written in ink or carved in stone, but carried quietly in the blood that moves through us. Every heartbeat is an echo of ancient unions, every cell a record of forgotten lives. For centuries, we believed we stood alone, that our lineage stretched in a straight line from the first humans who walked out of Africa. But the truth, revealed by the patient science of DNA, is far more tangled, far more human. The giants never disappeared. They became part of us. When geneticists first mapped the human genome, they expected to find a clean division between modern humans and the extinct species that came before. Instead, they discovered fragments of code that did not belong to us at all. Within our cells were ghostly fingerprints, traces of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA woven into the double helix of our being. It was as if time itself had left a signature, proof that once, long ago, we met them not as strangers, but as kin. Those encounters were not fleeting. They were intimate, shaped by curiosity, survival, and shared nights beneath the same cold stars. And from them came bloodlines that endure to this day. Among Melanesian peoples, Up to 6% of their DNA can be traced to the Denisovans, the lost giants of the Altai. In East Asians, smaller but unmistakable fragments remain. In Europeans and West Asians, echoes of Neanderthal ancestry whisper through the genome. These are not myths, they are measurable, living legacies of an ancient convergence. That borrowed blood gave us more than memory. It carried strength. From Neanderthals, we inherited resistance to cold, denser bones and immune defenses against ancient diseases. From Denisovans came the ability to thrive in high altitudes, breathing thin air where others would falter. We did not simply replace them, we absorbed them. Their gifts became our inheritance, their stories encoded in every generation that followed. And yet, most of us never feel it. We live unaware that the hands we use, the lungs that draw breath, the eyes that seek warmth and safety, all carry the quiet engineering of people who no longer walk the earth. The giants are gone, but their essence hums beneath our skin, dormant but alive. So when you look at your reflection, remember that you are not one story, but many. Behind your face are 1,000 ancestors, some human, some almost human, all bound by the same longing to endure. The giants did not vanish into the snow, they became the pulse that moves within us still. In the far reaches of the north, where the sun barely rises in winter and the air cuts like glass, the bones of giants sleep beneath the frost. Beneath peat bogs, riverbanks, and ancient burial mounds, archaeologists have uncovered skeletons of humans who towered above their kind, men and women who would have stood over 7 feet tall, their frames built not by legend, but by evolution's own hand. These were the tall ones of the north, children of the Ice Age, molded by hunger, endurance, and the cruel wisdom of the cold. Their bones tell the story that words never could. Thick femurs like carved timber, broad rib cages built to hold vast lungs, joints large enough to bear a life of endless strain. Their skulls show no sign of deformity or disease. These were not exceptions of birth, not giants of myth, but a people shaped by climate and survival. The cold favored those who could generate heat and store strength. Over generations, the weak dwindled and the strong endured, their stature rising like the glaciers that framed their world. Their diet was their forge. They lived on the flesh of mammoth, elk, reindeer, and bear, consuming protein and fat in quantities unthinkable today. Their fires burned with marrow and bone grease. Their bodies adapted, muscles thickened, bones grew denser, and their metabolism became an engine of endurance. To hunt in that frozen silence required not just courage, but a kind of strength modern humans can scarcely imagine. When they drove their spears into the flanks of charging beasts, they did so with arms capable of breaking bone. When they carried their kills across miles of snow, they bore the weight as easily as others carried children. Legends that would one day speak of frost giants and northern titans may have begun with whispers of these people. To those who came later, smaller and more fragile, the ancient bones found in frozen soil would have seemed impossible, as if they belonged to another race entirely. And in a way, they did a humanity crafted for a harsher earth. As the Ice Age faded, the great cold loosened its grip, and the forests swallowed the tundra. The tall ones, once so perfectly designed for the endless winter, began to disappear. Their strength was no longer needed. Their size, once salvation, became burden. But their story endures in the bones they left behind, and in the quiet awe they inspire. When you stand beneath the northern sky, beneath the lights that dance like memory itself, you are standing in their world, the world of the giants who once ruled the frost. It began with a storm over the hills of Germany, in a quiet valley carved by time and rain. The year was 1856, and a group of limestone quarrymen were digging near a small cave above the Dussel River. Their tools struck something strange, a bone larger than any they had seen, smooth and ancient, sealed in the earth like a secret. When they unearthed it, they found more: a skull, a pelvis, fragments of ribs. The bones were thick, heavy, almost brutal in form. Word spread quickly. Some said they belonged to a cave bear. Others whispered that they were the remains of a fallen giant. The place was called Neander Valley Neanderthal in German, and from that discovery, a name would be born that carried both reverence and insult for more than a century. When scholars first studied the remains, they recoiled. The skull was low and long, the brow ridges pronounced, the face projecting forward. To them, it did not look human enough, and because it was different, it became monstrous. In those days, science was still learning to separate discovery from pride. The idea that another kind of human might have existed challenged everything people believed about themselves. Many refused to accept it. Clergymen declared it a deformed modern man, perhaps a Cossack soldier crippled by rickets. Others said it was an ancient warrior bent by sin, a relic of the biblical flood. To call it human was heresy. To call it animal was comforting. And so, for generations, Neanderthals became the symbol of everything we thought we had risen above: primitive, brutish, less than us. But time has a way of humbling certainty. As more bones emerged across Europe, skulls from Belgium, jaws from France, tools from Spain, the picture began to change. These were not monsters. They were builders, hunters, caretakers of their sick and old, the same species who lit fires and buried their dead with flowers. The bones from Neander Valley were not evidence of something subhuman, but of another humanity entirely, one that had lived and thrived long before our own kind appeared. The irony is that fear and pride delayed the truth. For over 100 years, Neanderthals remained the world's misunderstood giants trapped between myth and memory. Yet the more we learn, the clearer it becomes that they were not our inferiors. They were our reflections cast in colder light. If you stand today at the mouth of that cave in Neander Valley, the wind still carries the same sound it did in 1856, a quiet hum of rain against stone, a reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear are only the ancestors we have yet to understand. It began as a migration, not a conquest. From the dry savannas of Africa came a new kind of human, smaller, leaner, but quick in thought and light in step. They carried fire in their hands, language on their tongues, and imagination in their eyes. They had no maps, no borders, no sense of destiny. They followed rivers and stars, crossing deserts, forests, and mountains, their shadows stretching across a planet that was not yet theirs. And somewhere in the heart of Eurasia, beneath the cold breath of Ice Age winds, they met the others. The meeting was quiet. There were no armies, no speeches, no sudden clash of stone and spear. It was simply two worlds touching, two branches of the same tree finding one another again after ages apart. The Neanderthals watched from the forests of Europe, their massive forms half hidden in the mist. The Denisovans lingered in the mountain caves of the east, their fires flickering against the rock. And then, through the fog and snow, they saw something strange, humans like themselves, yet not. The newcomers were slender, their faces narrow, their eyes filled with restless purpose. No one recorded their first words. If words were spoken at all, perhaps they shared food, exchanged tools, or simply stared across the firelight in cautious wonder. The moment would shape the future of every human who would ever live, yet at the time it must have seemed like nothing at all. For thousands of years they coexisted. They traded, they fought, they mated. The boundaries between species blurred beneath the stars. Children were born, carrying the blood of both worlds. Hybrids of strength and adaptability, the living link between the old world and the new. For a time, the balance held. But change is relentless. The newcomers were not stronger, but they were more flexible. They crafted lighter tools, traveled farther, and adapted to every landscape the earth could offer. The giants of the cold began to dwindle. The Neanderthals retreated deeper into their caves, the Denisovans vanished into the mountains, and soon the last of their kind disappeared into the silence of history. Yet they were never truly lost. Their blood runs beneath our skin, their instincts flicker in our bones. Every breath we take carries a whisper of those who came before, their endurance, their vision, their memory. The meeting of those two worlds was not the end of one and the rise of another. It was a merging, a quiet alchemy that made us what we are. Humanity was not born in isolation. It was forged in contact, in mingled blood, in the fragile space between survival and understanding. There is a moment in the long story of humanity when firelight fell on two kinds of faces at once: the Neanderthals, broad and powerful, and the newly arrived Homo sapiens, slender and quick-eyed, shared the same flames beneath the same cold stars. For thousands of years, their worlds overlapped. In the caves of Europe, the valleys of the Middle East, and the mountains of Asia, they lived side by side, sometimes as neighbors, sometimes as rivals, sometimes as something far more intimate. Archaeological traces tell this story better than words ever could. In one cave, a Neanderthal tool lies beside a blade fashioned by modern humans, their craftsmanship nearly identical. In another, a hearth contains ashes from both species, mixed and layered like two verses of the same song. They hunted the same herds, tracked the same rivers, painted on the same walls, and when the cold pressed too close, they likely shared warmth, shared food, perhaps even shared dreams. The evidence of their connection is written not just in stone, but in us. Within the DNA of every person alive today, outside of Africa, there lingers a genetic whisper from that age. It is proof that these encounters went beyond conflict and curiosity. They created families, a Neanderthal father and a human mother, or the other way around, their children carrying the legacy of both. Those children grew up, survived, and carried that shared fire forward through time until it became our inheritance. Imagine those nights. The fire crackling low, sparks rising toward a ceiling of stone blackened by centuries of smoke. Outside, the ice howled through the trees, but inside, the air shimmered with warmth and breath. They spoke in gestures, in grunts, in laughter, perhaps not in words but in meaning. The taller ones showed the smaller how to find shelter in the cliffs, how to read the movements of the mammoth herds. The newcomers, in turn, brought fresh ways of shaping blades, new rhythms of thought, and a hunger for discovery that would one day circle the planet. For generations, these exchanges continued, not as conquest, not as extinction, but as coexistence. They lived together long enough to share not only tools but emotions, grief, wonder, and the unspoken recognition that both were human in their own way. Yet the balance could not last forever. The world was changing again. The ice receded, forests crept north, and with the shifting climate came scarcity. Competition grew sharper. Slowly, the giants faded from the record, their fires extinguished one by one, but they are not gone. Their strength still moves in the bones of our children. Their instincts still whisper in our blood. When you look into a fire today, you are seeing the same light that once flickered in their eyes, a reflection shared across time, when two kinds of humanity met in the dark, and for a brief, miraculous moment, became one. The end of the giants did not come with war or plague, it came with warmth. Slowly, silently, the world that had built them began to disappear. The air softened, the ice retreated, and rivers that had once been frozen walls of glass began to run free again. The great cold that had shaped their bones, their muscles, their very instincts, was melting away. What had once been an advantage, thick bodies, dense bones, powerful limbs, was now a burden. The world that had demanded strength now rewarded adaptability. It began in whispers. Seasons stretched longer. Winters became shorter, their bite less cruel. The tundra that had once stretched endlessly across Europe and Asia began to bloom. Forests crawled north, reclaiming the frozen plains. The mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses that had fed the great-bodied humans followed the cold, retreating deeper into the shrinking ice. Herds grew smaller, harder to find. The old hunters, built for endurance, found themselves in a changing world that no longer needed their strength. Meanwhile, a different kind of human was thriving. The newcomers from Africa, slender, clever, quick, were built not for cold, but for adaptation. They learned to hunt smaller animals, to fish in rivers, to gather roots and grains. They crafted lighter weapons, devised traps, and began to think in ways that stretched beyond survival. They watched the changing land and changed with it. The tall ones could not. Competition followed scarcity. Two worlds collided once more, not in firelight but in hunger. Where the Neanderthals once ruled the valleys and forests, small bands of Homo sapiens appeared, setting up camp near the same rivers, chasing the same prey. The encounters were not always violent, but they were never equal. The smaller humans reproduced faster, formed larger groups, and communicated with a precision that outmatched brute strength. While the giants relied on muscle, the newcomers relied on cooperation. While the Neanderthals fought the land, the sapiens learned to use it. As the centuries passed, the balance tipped. One by one, the strongholds of the old species disappeared. In France, in Spain, in the Caucasus, the tools of the Neanderthals vanished from the soil, replaced by those of a people who thought, spoke, and planned differently. The Denisovans held out longer in the east, but the warming mountains could not shield them forever. Their numbers dwindled until their fires burned no more. Yet their extinction was not total. It was transformation. Before they vanished, they left something behind: blood, memory, fragments of DNA that would find a home in their successors. The giants were not erased. They were absorbed. They became the hidden architects of human endurance, their strength woven into the fragile fabric of those who replaced them. When the last of the great-bodied people looked across the thawing landscape, they must have felt it, the world slipping away. The cold that had protected them was dying, and with it, their purpose. The snow melted. The rivers sang again. And the earth, indifferent and eternal, turned its face toward a new kind of human one, born not of strength, but of change. The giants faded, but their story lived on in us, carried quietly through time, waiting to be remembered. In the sun-baked soils of Spain and the rugged limestone valleys of southern France, archaeologists uncovered bones that defied expectations, skeletal remains of humans who stood taller, broader, and stronger than any population that followed. Their leg bones were thick as clubs, their shoulders massive, their hands wide and dense. These were not creatures of myth. They were men of flesh and will, hunters who ruled the Iberian plains during the last breath of the Ice Age. The bones told their story long before the words did. Each fragment carried the weight of a life built on endurance. Their femurs were heavy, dense with calcium, shaped by years of movement across jagged terrain. Their shoulder joints were enlarged, the product of constant use, of throwing spears that weighed nearly twice as much as those used by later humans. When replicas of their stone-tipped weapons were made for study, few modern men could even lift them, let alone wield them in a hunt. Yet to these giants, they were tools as ordinary as breath. They lived in a land between two worlds, the frozen north and the temperate south. Winters could freeze rivers solid, summers could bake the land dry. Only those with immense strength and instinct survived. The Iberian hunters learned to read the land like scripture. They followed reindeer migrations through the mountains, stalked bison herds across open plains, and brought down beasts so large that the earth trembled beneath their charge. Every scar carved into their bones was earned. Every fracture healed was a memory of survival. Their strength was not only physical. They crafted tools of precision, shaping stone with skill that spoke of deep intelligence. Flint knives honed to surgical edges, spearheads balanced for perfect flight, ornaments carved from ivory and bone. In the caves of Atapuerca and El Cidrón, traces of their lives remain: charred hearths, animal bones split for marrow, pigments ground into powder for decoration or ritual. They were not beasts. They were builders of meaning. Yet even among their greatness, the shadow of change grew. The climate was shifting once again, the ice withdrawing northward, the forests returning. With them came new people, slimmer, faster, bearing lighter tools and different minds. The old hunters adapted as long as they could, but the world was changing too quickly. The large bodies that had once been their salvation now became their weight. The food they relied upon grew scarce, and the balance of survival began to tilt. Still, the memory of the giant hunters endures. Their bones rest beneath the soil, their tools still gleam faintly in museum light, their legacy etched into the very shape of our species. For in their might and their endurance, they left us a gift, the reminder that humanity was once something more elemental, carved by hardship, sculpted by the hunt. And if you walk the Iberian hills at dusk, when the wind moves through the grass and the earth smells of stone and memory, you can almost feel them there, watching from the past, men built like mountains, guardians of a world now lost to time. Far in the heart of Asia, where the wind never stops and the mountains breathe frost, lies Mount Kelon, a place older than memory itself. The landscape there feels haunted, carved by glaciers that never entirely left, and by storms that seem to remember a time before humans spoke. In the deep gorges of Siberia and the cold caverns of Mongolia, archaeologists uncovered traces of a people who once lived where few could endure. What they found defied expectation: bones that spoke of strength beyond measure and tools so large that modern hands can barely grasp them. The discovery began like a whisper. In the early years of the 20th century, Russian researchers mapped a cave system high along the slopes of Mount Kelon. The first finds were simple: fragments of flint, shards of animal bone, a scattering of ash. But as they dug deeper into the permafrost, the soil revealed something astonishing. Embedded within layers of ancient earth lay a femur thicker than any modern man's arm. Nearby, they uncovered hand axes and chisels that dwarfed even the largest tools from Europe's Ice Age. Whoever had used them was no ordinary hunter. These were the marks of beings built for a world of extremes. Later excavations confirmed the pattern. In multiple sites stretching from the Altai to northern Mongolia, the same story repeated: massive bones, dense as stone, and tools fashioned with a precision that suggested both intelligence and incredible physical power. Some femurs measured nearly twice the cross-sectional strength of modern human bones. Their density hinted at people who walked endless distances across frozen tundra, whose muscles bore the weight of constant movement, and whose lungs had adapted to the thin, biting air of high altitude. These were not myths. They were real humans, or at least human enough. Their remains bore similarities to both Neanderthals and Denisovans, but also traits unique to the mountains themselves: thicker joints, longer torsos, and wide hands shaped for labor and cold. It was as though the earth had sculpted them to survive what others could not. They were the giants of the steppe, living in a place that would have killed the unprepared within hours. The caves tell fragments of their story: hearths built from mammoth bone, piles of charred reindeer antlers, marks carved into stone walls, simple but deliberate. They hunted enormous game: woolly rhinos, cave bears, even bison that rivaled their own strength. Their tools show a mastery of both endurance and creativity. To shape flint in the freezing wind with bare hands demanded a kind of patience that only necessity could teach. And then, as with all the giants of the old world, they vanished. The winds covered their tracks, the caves filled with silence. What drove them to extinction remains unknown. Perhaps it was climate, perhaps isolation. Or perhaps they did not vanish at all, but were absorbed, fused into the genetic tapestry of the people who live in those mountains today. When night falls over Mount Kelon, the air hums with an ancient weight. The stars reflect on the snow like embers from fires long extinguished. Somewhere beneath that frozen soil lie the bones of the endurance-bred giants who once walked there, creatures of ice and will, the last children of a colder, harder earth. Their mystery endures, not because we cannot explain it, but because a part of us still recognizes them. In their struggle, we see the origin of our own. Across the endless horizon of Central Asia, where the grass moves like water and the wind sings through the bones of forgotten camps, the earth still remembers the footsteps of a vanished people. They were the lost tribes of the steppe, descendants of giants, hybrids of old bloodlines, carrying within them the echo of those who came before. They were neither Neanderthal nor Denisovan, neither ancient nor modern, but something in between. For a time, they ruled the Great Plains, their lives unfolding beneath skies so wide they seemed to stretch into eternity. When the world began to warm, and the ice retreated north, These people moved with it. The mountains that once sheltered their ancestors began to thaw, releasing rivers that carved their way toward the open steppe. The hybrid tribes followed those waters, chasing herds of bison and horse, their migrations tracing the veins of a continent. They carried tools of flint and bone, spears hardened in fire, and the knowledge of two worlds, one of endurance, one of intelligence. Their bodies bore the strength of the giants, but their minds carried the adaptability of the new humans who had come out of Africa. In that union, something remarkable was born. Archaeologists have found their traces scattered across the plains of Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and western China. Burial sites reveal bones, both massive and refined skulls with the heavy brow ridges of ancient stock, but with faces that hint at something more familiar. In their graves lie ornaments of carved ivory, the teeth of predators worn as necklaces, and fragments of ochre-stained stone. They lived as nomads, masters of mobility, building no cities and leaving no walls. Their monument was the land itself, and their story was written not in words but in the dust. Legends of them survive in whispers. The Turkic epics speak of sky-born ancestors, tall and strong, whose eyes shone like ice, and whose voices carried over the plains. Mongolian folklore tells of the tall riders who came from the mountains, teaching the first herders how to tame the wild horses. Even in Greek chronicles, long after their disappearance, there are echoes of northern tribes so large and fierce that they were mistaken for demigods. These stories may not be pure imagination. Beneath myth, truth often sleeps. Genetic studies suggest that as these hybrid peoples moved across the steppe, they mingled again and again with the smaller, lighter humans who followed. Their bloodlines spread like smoke in the wind, leaving faint traces in the DNA of modern Eurasian and Central Asian populations. Every heartbeat in those regions carries a rhythm that began long before civilization, a rhythm that once belonged to the giants of the ice. And then, as the centuries turned, they vanished into history. The grass grew over their camps, the herds they followed moved on, the bones of their dead sank into the soil, preserved by the cold they once conquered, but their presence never truly faded. It lingers in the strength of the people who still ride those plains, in the legends told beside campfires, and in the blood that remembers. When night falls over the steppe and the stars rise like a million watching eyes, you can almost hear them, the lost tribes moving still, their laughter carried by the wind, their memory woven into the song of the earth. They were the bridge between worlds, the last living breath of the giants who shaped us. And though their names are gone, their story endures in every human who has ever looked at the horizon and felt that quiet, ancient pull to wander. The story of humanity's rise is also the story of its shrinking. The bones tell it plainly. When Homo sapiens became the dominant species, the great height of the ancient world began to fade. The broad shoulders, the dense bones, the heavy frames that once defined our kind slowly diminished, replaced by smaller bodies and larger minds. It was not a sudden transformation, but a long, quiet surrender to a changing world, a world where survival no longer depended on strength of limb, but on the power of thought. In the fossil record, the difference is unmistakable. The skeletons of our Ice Age ancestors stand as monuments to endurance. Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens were not only taller on average, they were denser, heavier, built like stone carved by wind and time. Their bones show signs of constant motion, of muscles that pulled and worked from dawn until dusk. Every day was labor, every meal a prize earned through struggle. But as the millennia passed and the earth warmed, a strange thing happened. Humanity began to grow weaker in body and stronger in mind. Around 10,000 years ago, with the dawn of agriculture, the human frame began to shrink. Hunter-gatherers who once towered over 5'10" began to average closer to 5'5". Their bones lost mass, their teeth weakened, and their muscles thinned. Compared to the giant hunters of the Ice Age, the first farmers were fragile. Yet they were not failing, they were evolving. The world had changed, and so did the definition of survival. Strength was no longer found in the arm that could throw a spear, but in the mind that could plant a seed. The dense skeletons of our ancestors show a life of relentless motion, running, climbing, hauling, enduring. But with settlement came stillness. People spent more time bent over fields and less time chasing prey across open plains. Diets narrowed too. The wild variety of meat, fish, fruit, and roots that nourished their ancestors was replaced with grain, soft and filling but poor in nutrition. The result can be seen in the bones, thin, brittle, lined with the quiet marks of deficiency. Civilization, for all its brilliance, came with a cost. Yet what we lost in strength, we gained in imagination. The same period that saw our bodies shrink also saw the rise of art, language, architecture, and science. The great skulls of the ancient hunters gave way to faces finer and more delicate, but behind those faces burned a sharper intellect. Humanity was trading muscle for memory, endurance for innovation. We no longer needed to match the beasts of the tundra in strength, for we had learned how to shape the world instead. It is easy to mourn what we lost, the power, the stature, the raw connection to the earth, but in truth, we simply evolved in another direction. The giants walked so that the dreamers could stand. Their bones built the foundation for our future, even as their strength faded into legend. And though we now live in cities far removed from the wild, that ancient fire remains within us, faint but enduring, a reminder that once, long ago, we were giants too. Beneath the surface of our skin, deeper than memory, lies an echo. It hums quietly within the double helix of our DNA, a molecular song passed down through unbroken generations. It is the sound of our ancestors speaking without words, their legacy written not on stone walls but in the very code that makes us who we are. Scientists call it the genetic echo, and within its rhythm lies proof that we were never alone. When geneticists began to study the genes that govern growth and development, genes like GHR, responsible for growth hormone receptors, and IGF-1, which influences muscle and bone formation, they discovered something remarkable. Hidden within those sequences were fragments that did not belong to us alone. They bore the signatures of Neanderthals and Denisovans, remnants of unions that happened tens of thousands of years ago when early Homo sapiens first crossed paths with the great-bodied humans of the Ice Age. The giants may have vanished, but pieces of their biology live on inside us, silent but persistent. In some people, these ancient fragments still shape the body. Certain variants of the GHR gene, for example, have been linked to increased bone density, a vestige of the Neanderthal physique, thick, strong, built for survival in a world of frost and famine. Others carry traces of Denisovan DNA that influence lung capacity and oxygen efficiency, traits once vital for endurance in the high-altitude cold of the Tibetan Plateau. Our ancestors did not just meet these ancient species. They absorbed them, carrying their gifts into the future. The story those genes tell is not one of domination but of blending. Humanity did not rise by replacing its kin but by merging with them. Every exchange of blood was a quiet negotiation with the environment, a genetic trade between strength and adaptability. Where Neanderthal DNA added resilience to our bones and immune systems, Denisovan inheritance offered endurance and adaptation to extreme climates. Evolution did not choose one lineage, it wove them together. When you look at the diversity of humanity today, our heights, our frames, the subtle differences in how our bodies endure heat, cold, or hunger, you are seeing the outcome of that ancient synthesis. Some of us carry more of the past than others. Melanesian and Himalayan populations hold the deepest Denisovan traces, while Europeans and Asians bear more Neanderthal influence. Together, we are the living mosaic of a world that once held many kinds of humans. The genes themselves whisper of a time when size was survival, when the earth demanded not intelligence alone but power, stamina, and grit. They remind us that there was an age when humanity came in many shapes, tall, short, broad, lean, and each form was a solution to the same relentless question: how to endure. Every heartbeat carries that answer now. Within the quiet machinery of our cells, the ancient code still works, still shapes us in ways we cannot see. The genetic echo is more than a scientific curiosity, it is a bridge across time, a connection between the giants of the cold world and the modern people who walk beneath softer skies. And when we breathe, when we move, when we stand against the weight of the world, a small part of that old strength rises with us. The giants are gone, but their essence endures, written in every strand of who we are. In the quiet corners of museums and the dusty basements of forgotten universities, there are bones that should not exist. Bones too large, too human, too impossible to fit neatly into the story we have written for ourselves. Across the Caucasus Mountains, in the dry caves of the Levant, and even in the wind-swept deserts of South America, scattered reports have surfaced for centuries. Discoveries of skeletons that towered far beyond normal human height, bones of beings that seemed to belong to another world entirely. The first of these mysteries surfaced in the 19th century, when explorers in Georgia and Armenia stumbled upon burial sites containing femurs longer than a man's arm and skulls that could fit a modern human's head within their crowns. The accounts were often dismissed as exaggerations, mistakes of measurement, or even the results of ancient animal remains misidentified by eager hands. Yet, the pattern persisted. Decade after decade, more discoveries followed jawbones that did not match any known species, footprints fossilized beside extinct animals, skeletons reported to stand over 8 or 9 feet tall. In the caves of the Levant, researchers unearthed bones that blurred the boundary between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens, thick, dense, and unusually tall. Some of these finds seem to suggest the existence of a local population of hybrids, human in every sense, but carrying the proportions of the old world's giants. Scientists debated, measured, and debated again, and though many finds were later explained as outliers, others remained stubbornly beyond explanation. But perhaps the strangest tales come from across the ocean. In the early 1900s, along the river valleys of Peru and the burial mounds of Patagonia, skeletons of extraordinary size were reported, men and women whose remains measured well above 7 feet, their skulls elongated and robust, their teeth enormous. Some were documented, photographed, and studied, while others mysteriously vanished into private collections or storage rooms where no one could verify them again. Were they simply anomalies of biology, or relics of a lineage that stretched back to the forgotten age of the giants? Science, cautious and methodical, demands proof. Many of these claims dissolve under scrutiny measurements, misread, bones distorted by soil and time, legends inflated by imagination. Yet even with all explanations considered, a few findings remain unresolved. Certain femurs from the Caucasus defy scaling models. A massive human-like footprint preserved in sandstone from South America predates known habitation layers. Each time we think we have drawn the map of our ancestry, another shadow appears at its edge. The mystery of these bones is not only about what they were, but what they represent. They remind us that our story is not complete, that perhaps, among the countless forgotten generations, there were those who stood taller, stronger, more enduring than we can imagine. Maybe they were the last echoes of the Neanderthals and Denisovans, remnants of the giants who once ruled the cold world. Or perhaps they were something else entirely, a branch lost before history began. Whatever the truth, the bones that should not exist remain our reminder that even in an age of certainty, mystery still breathes beneath the earth. The soil has not yet told all its secrets, and the giants of our past may still be waiting for us to listen. Across the ancient cliffs of Europe, where wind and rain have worn the world down to its bones, the stones still speak. Their language is not written in words but in shapes and shadows carved by hands that lived thousands of years ago. On the walls of caves and the faces of mountains, human figures stride across the stone, some small and fragile, others impossibly tall, their outlines etched with reverence and awe. These are the petroglyphs of the old world, silent yet alive, whispering a question that has haunted archaeologists and dreamers alike. Were these towering figures symbols of gods, or memories of real beings who once walked among them? In the caves of northern Spain, at sites like El Castillo and La Pasiega, the oldest carvings tell stories without sound. Hunters are shown standing beneath massive figures, their proportions exaggerated beyond realism. Some stretched twice the height of those beside them, arms raised, spears in hand, as if leading or protecting. To the people who carved them, these images were not art for decoration, they were testimony, fragments of memory preserved in stone, and in that testimony, a strange reverence lingers. The larger figures are never drawn as enemies, they are companions, guardians, perhaps ancestors whose stature had already become legend. Similar patterns appear across the continent. In France's Vézère Valley, among the carvings of mammoths and deer, silhouettes of immense humanoid forms tower over the scenes of daily life. In Scandinavia, along the granite shores of Bohuslän, thousands of carvings show giant hunters etched beside boats and herds. Their heads brush the top of the panels, their limbs heavy and deliberate. Even in Italy's Val Camonica, one of the richest rock art sites in the world, giant figures wielding axes stand beside smaller, human-sized hunters. The repetition cannot be coincidence. Across vast distances and across cultures that never met, the same image returns the giant among men. Some scholars argue these carvings were metaphors, symbols of power and divinity. The giants, they say, represented spirits of the hunt, embodiments of strength or fertility. But others see something older and simpler: memory. Perhaps the ancient artists were recalling a truth their descendants would forget, that once humanity had more than one face. That some of their kin were larger, stronger, and different in ways too great to ignore. When we look at those carvings today, we are seeing through their eyes. To them, these giants were part of the natural world, not myths, but neighbors. They might have shared hunting grounds, exchanged fire, or lived in uneasy alliance before time, and change carried one race away. The carvings became the last bridge between memory and myth, between history and legend. As centuries turned to millennia, the giants faded, but their images remained. The stone preserved what memory could not. And so, long after their voices fell silent, their presence continued to shape the imagination of humankind. Myths of gods, titans, and heroes may have begun right there, carved in the dim firelight of caves where real giants once stood. The language of stone is slow, patient, eternal. It remembers what we forget. It holds the truth in its quiet lines, the story of a world where humans once looked up to others not as gods, but as kin. And when you stand before those carvings today, tracing the outline of a giant's hand with your eyes, you can almost feel it, a pulse in the rock, a heartbeat from a vanished age, still speaking across time. Time is a patient thief. It does not strike all at once, but erodes slowly, grain by grain, until what was once truth becomes memory, and memory fades into myth. The giants of the old world were not erased in a single night of fire or flood. They were buried, scattered, and forgotten by the slow machinery of the earth itself. Ice, sea, and soil conspired in silence, leaving only fragments behind, bones ground into dust, tools swallowed by mud, and stories carried forward only by the fragile voice of imagination. This was the great forgetting, the quiet erasure of an entire kind of humanity. When the last ice age loosened its grip, glaciers that had stretched for miles began to crawl backward. Their retreat was not gentle. They crushed everything in their path, grinding mountains into valleys, forests into clay, and bones into powder. The remains of those who had lived and hunted in the shadow of the ice were buried beneath its weight, entombed in frozen layers that would take tens of thousands of years to thaw. By the time the ice released its hold, the evidence of those great-bodied humans had already been rewritten by nature's hand. What was once a living being became a geological rumor. The rising seas followed. As the glaciers melted, the oceans swelled, swallowing coastlines and valleys where countless generations had lived. Much of the world that belonged to the giants now lies beneath the waves. Entire landscapes, plains where mammoths roamed, where Neanderthals and early humans hunted together, disappeared beneath hundreds of feet of water. The North Sea, now cold and deep, was once a vast grassland known as Doggerland, home to tribes who vanished when the tides rose. The same happened in Asia, around the Black Sea, and along the coasts of the Americas. What we call history is only the portion that survived above water. But the earth forgets unevenly. Now and then, it gives back fragments, a femur here, a jawbone there, too large or too strange to fit neatly into what we know. Scientists unearth them, measure them, classify them, and try to explain away what does not belong. Yet even as we analyze and catalog, something in those discoveries unsettles us. It feels as if we are listening to an echo that refuses to fade. The rest of their story lives in myth. Long after the bones were gone, the memories endured in whispers and legends. The Norse spoke of frost giants who shaped the world from ice and blood. The Greeks told of titans cast down by jealous gods. In the Bible, the Nephilim walked the earth before the flood. All of them different, yet all reflections of something once real. An ancestral memory of those who came before us. Larger, stronger, and lost to time. The great forgetting was not only physical, it was spiritual. As we built cities, we buried the old world beneath our own foundations. We forgot the faces of those who stood beside us in the beginning, the hands that shaped the first fires, the voices that spoke before words had form. What remains now are dreams, glimpses of a time when humanity was not alone, when we walked among others who mirrored us in shape but towered in presence. And perhaps that is why the idea of giants still stirs something deep within us. We feel it not as fantasy, but as longing, the faint remembrance of kin whose bones sleep beneath glaciers and seas. The world has forgotten them, but the blood remembers. In every story told by firelight, in every carving on stone, in every question we ask about where we came from, the giants live again, rising from the silence of time, asking not to be found, but to be remembered. Inside every one of us, hidden in the spiral of our DNA, lives a memory older than history. It does not speak in words or pictures but in code, tiny fragments of instruction passed down through countless generations. This is the ghost in the genome. The lingering presence of those who came before us, those who were once called the giants of the earth. They may have vanished from the surface of the world, but they never truly disappeared. They live on, quietly, inside our blood. When scientists first mapped the human genome, they expected a clean story, a single lineage stretching from early Homo sapiens in Africa to the modern humans who now populate the world. But what they found was more complicated and far more beautiful. Scattered throughout our DNA were foreign signatures, ancient patterns that did not belong to us. These fragments matched neither modern human samples nor any known mutations. It was as if ghosts were whispering from within the code itself. Further research revealed the truth. Those genetic traces came from our long-lost relatives, the Neanderthals and the Denisovan species of humans who once walked beside us, hunted with us, and shared our fires. When our ancestors left Africa some 70,000 years ago, they met these other peoples and, in time, merged with them. The encounters were not one moment but thousands, spread over centuries, woven into the rhythm of survival and curiosity. They exchanged tools, stories, and eventually, blood. The result was not extinction but inheritance. Today, up to 4% of the DNA in non-African populations can be traced back to those encounters. Europeans and Asians carry Neanderthal genes that influence everything from skin tone to immune response. Populations in Melanesia and Southeast Asia bear the imprint of Denisovan ancestry, including genes that allow life in high altitudes and frigid climates. Even our resistance to certain diseases and our ability to process new environments come, in part, from those ancient unions. The giants may be gone, but their wisdom still guides our cells. The ghost in the genome is not metaphorical. It is biological proof that humanity was never a straight line. We are not the children of one species, but the sum of many. Each of us carries an archive of evolution within us, a silent testimony to the meetings, loves, and struggles that shaped the dawn of civilization. Every heartbeat, every breath, every instinct of fear or endurance is touched by the blood of those who came before. When you look into the mirror, you are not seeing a single person. You are seeing the reflection of 100,000 years of survival, the Neanderthal hunter standing beside his fire, the Denisovan mother sheltering her child beneath the mountain storms, the first humans gazing into the unknown. All of them live within you, their code still working, still adapting, still remembering. We like to think of ourselves as separate from the past, as a new and final version of humanity. But in truth, we are haunted by our own creation. The ghosts are not behind us. They are within us. Every strand of DNA is a bridge across time, connecting us to those who once walked the frozen plains, the tall ones whose strength became our inheritance. We are their continuation, their answer to the cold, their final breath carried forward. The giants are not lost. They endure in us, in our bones, in our blood, and in the endless story written into the code of life itself. When the last of the great-bodied humans vanished from the world, they did not leave empty-handed. They left pieces of themselves within us, quiet and invisible, shaping our lives in ways we are only beginning to understand. What we call progress, what we call civilization, rests upon the gifts of those who came before. The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, the ancient hybrids of the north and steppe, they did not disappear. They became part of us, their legacy woven into every breath, every heartbeat, every act of survival. For thousands of years, modern humans and the giants lived side by side. They hunted the same beasts, drank from the same rivers, built fires against the same cold. Their worlds collided, and from that collision, something entirely new emerged. The bloodlines mixed, the genomes merged, and evolution took a new turn. In our bones and blood remain the echoes of those unions, remnants of their strength, their endurance, their intelligence. The traits that allowed them to master the Ice Age became the foundations of our success. From the Neanderthals, we inherited the architecture of resilience. Their bodies were built for punishment, their immune systems hardened by disease and scarcity. When we left Africa and entered their frozen lands, it was their genetic legacy that taught our cells to fight. The genes that help us resist infections, endure inflammation, and adapt to colder climates came from them. Even our skin and hair, their colors and thickness, are shaped by the Neanderthal code, tuned to a world of pale suns and harsh winters. From the Denisovans, we inherited the breath of the mountains. Their genes gave certain populations the ability to live where air grows thin and life becomes fragile. The people of the Himalayas, the Andes, and the high Pacific Islands still carry the blueprint of those ancient adaptations, their blood more efficient, their lungs more capable, their bodies remembering what it meant to survive at the edge of the sky. But what we took from them was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, human, the ability to plan, to imagine, to create, to look at stone and see a tool, at fire and see safety, was strengthened through the fusion of our minds. Their intelligence was different, shaped by endurance rather than invention, yet it added something essential to our kind: patience. The giants understood time in ways we no longer do. They lived slowly, intimately with the seasons, their wisdom carved not in words but in instinct. Some of that remains within us, the quiet pulse that draws us toward the natural world, the part of our soul that still feels at home beneath open skies. Their strength became our inheritance, their endurance became our backbone. Even their sorrow, the long struggle against a world that was leaving them behind, taught us something about perseverance. They endured to the very end, and because of that endurance, we exist. We often think of evolution as conquest, as one species triumphing over another, but the truth is gentler and far more profound. We did not conquer them, we became them. We took their fire, their knowledge, their blood, and in return, carried their story forward into the ages. Every time we survive disaster, every time our bodies adapt to illness or change, we are speaking in their language. The giants are gone, but they live within the architecture of our being. Their fingerprints mark our cells, their lessons guide our instincts. They gave us the means to endure a world that never stops changing. And though their bones lie buried in the deep earth, their story continues in the eyes of every living human, in the strength that rises when all else fails, and in the quiet reminder that we are not only their descendants, we are their legacy made flesh. The night was still. The tundra lay beneath a sky of trembling light, where curtains of green and violet shimmered like ghosts above the world. In a hollow carved from stone and snow, a small fire burned low, its glow breathing against the walls. There, a Neanderthal mother sat beside her child. She watched the flames dance in the reflection of his eyes, and beyond the cave's mouth, the auroras rippled over the horizon like the pulse of a living sky. She did not know it, but she was watching the end of her kind. Outside, the wind carried the scent of thawing ice. The great cold that had ruled her world was dying, retreating northward with every generation. The herds were moving farther away, the winters were shorter, and new people, smaller, faster, clever in strange ways, had begun to appear on the plains. She had seen them once from a distance, their movements quick and cautious, their tools finer and sharper than her own. She did not know who they were, only that they hunted the same beasts, drank from the same streams, and looked enough like her to unsettle something deep inside. In that moment, beneath the auroras, she could not see the vast tide of time that was already moving. She could not know that her people would vanish within a few thousand years, their fires extinguished one by one. She could not know that her child, sleeping softly beside her, carried the blood that would one day flow through us. She was not witnessing extinction, though history would call it that. She was watching transformation, the quiet merging of one humanity into another. The light of the fire flickered across her face, casting deep shadows beneath her brow. Her hands were strong but gentle as she adjusted the furs around her child. The world outside was harsh, but in that cave there was warmth, memory, and the kind of love that binds every generation to the next. She could not write, she could not speak her story, but her body carried it forward. Within her bones, within her blood, the map of survival was already written. The auroras flared brighter. The sky looked alive, as if the earth itself were breathing out its last sigh of winter. The mother tilted her head upward, her face illuminated by the strange, shifting light. To her it must have seemed like a sign, something vast and unknowable moving through the heavens, and perhaps it was. The old world was fading, and a new one was stirring in the dark beyond the mountains. She closed her eyes, unaware that the line of her people would not end, but change form. Her descendants would one day speak languages, build cities, and look back at the stars she had seen. They would call themselves modern, separate, unique. Yet inside them, in the secret music of their cells, her story would remain the story of endurance, of fire, of love beneath a frozen sky. When the last embers died and the wind swallowed the night, the world turned quietly onward. But the mother's blood did not fade. It traveled through time, through storm and sun, through the veins of countless children who never knew her name. And tonight, when you look at the sky and see the northern lights drifting above the earth, you are seeing what she saw. You are remembering for her. The giants did not disappear, they became us. And through us, their fire still burns.